Well, welcome back to Barley and Hops. I'm George. Yes, and you can see by the sign, the channel that dares to unlock the mysteries of home distilling. Today, we're going to talk about my favorite, heat control, pulse width modulators, and I've talked about these before, and proportional integral derivative controllers. Let's compare them.
Good old Mountain Dew. Yes, he called it that old Mountain
Well,
Dew.
now you know that I'm just excited as always to be with you and share information as much as we possibly can. Now, as promised, we're going to highlight somebody today. We're going to highlight a still from down under. Yes, Jeff McInnis sent us a photo, and you'll see it right here. This is the Charles 803 reflux still, and he got the plans. He got everything he needed. He said he got it from the States. I'm assuming that he got it from the United States, but nonetheless, he's been running this thing for years and years, and he runs 180 to 190 proof every time. So, look, Jeff, we appreciate having you send that in to us, and we like looking at your project. That is absolutely amazing, and anybody else can build one just the same way that you did. Now, oh, by the way, Jeff happens to be a master electrician and also the author of Chukponics, which I actually Googled, and I was like, this is amazing. It's a guide to the urban farmer. So you take a small backyard, and it's kind of likens itself to aquaponics in a way, but it's Chukponics. And it's an amazing read. Jeff, thanks a lot for sending all that information in to us, and we enjoy sharing that with everybody else. Now, on to what we're here for today. Yes, the pulse width modulator. Now, I've read, I've been contacted, of course, with all this information flow, is that people think that I am stuck on PIDs. I'm not. I prefer the PID, the proportional integral derivative controller. But I'm not stuck on them by no means. My goodness, I use the pulse width modulator on a regular basis as well because it is an option. We're talking about heating your still to suit your needs the way that you want to run it. But there are some definite differences between the two processes that we just need to discuss briefly so that we all fully understand what's going on. Now, the next video that I do is going to be sort of like a technical outline of, you'll be able, when you finish watching that, you'll be able to describe to your neighbor what a pulse width modulator does and how it does it, as opposed to what a proportional integral derivative controller does and how it does it. We're going to just graph it out for you and show you exactly what the electricity does or what you can do to control it. So, that's where we are. Well, I happen to have laying around, of course, I've got pulse width modulators, I've got PIDs, I've got a bunch of different things, and I get to mess with these on a regular basis. And in doing so, I learn so much. Now, this is let's start with this one. This is probably the most rudimentary pulse width modulator that I have right here. Now, what does a pulse width modulator do? In general, I mean, just in layman's terms, what does it do? Well, I can actually plug this in and turn this knob from 0 to 100%, 0% being off, of course, 100% being full on. And I can, if I plug this into 120 volts, all the way on would be providing 120 volts to this outlet. And then, but I can adjust that. And I can vary that back to 110 volts, 100 volts, 50 volts if I want, and so on and so forth, all the way down to 0 and turning this off. That's what a pulse width modulator does. Now, I've also got one here. See, I boxed this one up. I love this one. This one does exactly the same thing. I put a volt amp-meter on the bottom here because when you adjust the voltage, of course, your amperage is going to change along with it. It just gives you a way to just track it. And this here is a digital readout, and I've got a minus and a plus button. And all this does, it does the same thing as this potentiometer knob that controls the SCR that's in here. See, and I'm using terms, I don't even have to explain what they are. Trust me, they just work. This is a really good controller. This is a really good controller. This one's digital, and this one is analog. So the same thing you do with the knob on here, you're doing with a digital control here, and you can set it for 30%, 38%, 75%. You can set it for 100%. It's totally up to you. And that is the amount of voltage that will be provided to your outlet, which is, of course, plugged in, provided to your element. Let's plug a light bulb in and kind of demonstrate that. All right? That's why I just want to show you that. Now, before I do that, there's these small ones. You can get these on Amazon. They're probably about $6 or $8. Be cautious, please. This is one of those cases where smaller is not necessarily better. And they advertise these at like 2,000 watts. So you can run a 2,000 watt element. Yeah, but that's sort of a fleeting term. Yes, it's rated to control 2,000 watts, but not for an extended period of time. These are made smaller because they are less expensive, and they're less expensively made, need I say any more. If you're going to purchase one, it's worth spending the extra 15 bucks and get one that will do it all. It comes with a fan and everything you need, and it'll control. This is known as a variable, yes, variable controller. This is known as a variable controller, okay? Now, this is the PID, proportional integral derivative controller. This is not a variable controller. Well, yeah, it is kind of, it works on the variable principle, but it is a closed loop system that does it all by itself. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. Let's plug a light in here. And I want to get this light around here so you can see it. And there it is. And let me plug, we're going to plug it into the one that I have the most rudimentary. And this is not a video on how to wire these things up. It's just a demonstration on how they work. And this right here is the, there you go, good, I turned it down. This is a pulse width modulator. It's a 120 volt model. It'll handle 240 volts, but I've got it wired up for 120 volts, and I've got it on one outlet. Now I'm going to plug the light into here, and then I'm going to plug this in. Now I just happen to know that this is already working. It's hot. Now watch what happens. As I start to turn this dial up, what I'll get is eventually, you notice that light that starts to shine. Let me turn it down. You see I can turn it down. I can dim it. And I can turn it up. And then I can turn it down. And then I can turn it all the way up, and it's on 100%. This is a 60 watt light bulb, I believe. Yeah, that's a 60 watt light bulb. So it really doesn't draw a whole lot of amperage. But as you turn that down, you'll see that based on that adjustment and based on the current and voltage flow, that light bulb does two things. It either gets brighter or gets dimmer. That's the way your element works. What does this require? Think about it. What does this require? It requires you to interface with it to turn it up or turn it down. So you're not chasing temperature, but you're adjusting based on the output and the temperature that you sense. Because you'll notice that there is no interface between this and the environment. You just have this, and then you need to find another way to track the temperature. That's quite all right. That works. Now, let's do this with it, because this one, as a matter of fact, I have laying around here. Yes. Should have had this standing by. I've got an amp meter here, and I'm going to put this on 4 amps. There we go. Now I'm going to clamp this amp meter, this amp clamp, around the hot wire that's going to the light bulb. Because you know that whenever you're trying to measure amperage, you're trying to measure the flow in the line. You know, how intense is that flow of electricity? And that's what this does, and it does it magnetically. All right. So you only always have one wire that goes through this. Always. If you put two wires through this, you're defeating the purpose. So I'll clamp that on the hot wire, and I'm going to read that. And I've got this set on 4 amps, and right now I'm reading 2.8 amps of current. And as I turn that up, when I get that to full power, I'm reading, well, 0.5, I'm sorry, yeah, 0.510 amps. And then as I start to turn that down, there we go, that's 0.397 amps. And even go lower, and I can get that light bulb to just barely come on, and I'm now tracking 0.243 amps of power. Now that also equates directly to voltage. And we can find that out. I mean, I could put a voltmeter on there at the same time and track the voltage, but I've got one here that does it digitally. You see, it's just another application, another way of tracking what you're doing. Let's do that. Let me unplug this one. Unplug the light. I'll set this one out of the way because that's my rudimentary. I threw that on a piece of wood so that I could play with it. I've got this box. See, now notice two things. Plug it in first. Bing. Damn, there you go. Now you notice I've got it turned on, and there, everything zeroes itself out. It's showing 141 volts. I've got a clear RMS value of 141 volts right now. Well, that's before I do anything in here, and of 0 amperage. There's no flow of electricity through the box. If I plug this light into the bottom one, you notice it comes on at 100%. Now it comes on at 100%, and it's not going to show me any amperage because that light bulb draws less than an amp. All right, so it just shows 0 amps. If I had an element on there, it would show the element draw, which is of course higher than 1 amp. Now, that's my accessory. That'd be like for a water pump or something like that. I've written on the top here, believe it or not, you will not believe the number of people that get this confused. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, they'll call me, George, I plug the element in, I'm working it, it won't turn off. It's on 100%. I was like, yeah, plug it in where it says element. This only controls this, top, the element. So I plug that into the element. See, I've got that set at 100%. Let's start dropping that temperature, or let's start dropping the voltage. There's 85%. Now you can start seeing that that light should start, look at that, that light is starting to fluctuate and get a little bit dimmer. I'm at 52. And you'll notice here that there are 76 volts running through that. So I'm controlling the voltage from here to there. So right now, if that was an element, I started off at 120 volts. Now I'm working it with half of the available voltage. So that means that that is working at a lower wattage. That's how it works. You know what I wanted to do? I wanted to find out how many volts does it actually take for a 60-watt light bulb to actually come on. We're going to find out. And we're going to keep going lower and lower. Right now we're at 29% of the available voltage provided, and it's just barely, and when it goes out, it's struggling to stay on. I can see that. There you go. Oh, there we go. Just barely, 12 volts. 12 volts of alternating current, and you'll just get a real slight redness of the filament that's in there. And of course, if we start working that up, of course, our light bulb starts to get brighter and brighter and brighter. It's just like we're working an element. So these work extremely well, but what is the only thing missing here? Depending on what your desires are. The only thing missing is the linkage between this and the environment. The only link between this and the environment now lies right here. You have to look at your temperature and set your control. And we're going to show you on the next video when we do that, what is 49% of a 2,000 watt element. If we're only providing 49%, which is at this point 71 volts, we can mathematically figure out what is the actual wattage of that element, or what's it actually operating at. It's such a neat thing to figure out. Oh gosh, impress your friends. Oh hell, impress yourself. To be able to describe that and understand exactly what's going on, so that when things don't happen, see, that's my theory, is if I can explain to you as much as you can possibly soak up from left to right about a process, and should something happen in between here, you'll know where to go to fix it. Okay? All right, that's the whole purpose of getting in depth with some of these topics. It's valuable information. And oh, by the way, trust me, it does lend itself into your everyday life and other things that you do around the house and or around the shop. Oh. All right, let's get this back up to 100%. There we go. I'll just hold it. It'll scroll. There. I'm at 100%. So if I had an element on there now, it'd be operating at 100%. Now the point is that you leave it set there, you can find your own set point, but you know that as the volume changes in your kettle, what must change after that? Yeah, it takes a little bit more energy, so you are going, as your flow starts to slow down and you're getting towards the ending of your run, you're going to have to increase your percentage accordingly in order to track that. You do that through the thermometer, through the flow rate, and all those things. Now, the major difference here is, let me turn that off. The major difference here is that with a PID controller, you've got your thermocouple, your probe, and this works just like any other probe. You got the really short one, works exactly the same way. It's just as effective. It all depends on what you want. You can get them with this 18-inch probes on them if you want to stick it in that far. This one has a 1/2-inch thread on it, so it fits in a 1/2-inch NPT threaded port, and the other ones have anywhere from 3/8 to 6 millimeter threads. They all work the same way. But what this does is this is known as a closed loop system, which means that it constantly tracks temperature, and it takes that temperature and it uses an algorithm, which is nothing more than a formula. It says, hey, what is the temperature right now? What temperature does George want? Whoa, how far away am I from that temperature? Am I above it? I don't do nothing. Am I below it? How far from it am I? Which is my error rate? Well, the error is X, so let me give it a percentage of power is in proportional, a proportional band. Let me give it a percentage of power, and let me check that over a period of time, my integral period. And then let me figure out, well, over a period of time, I've increased based on that power this far. Now, what about my error rate? Is my error rate really closing drastically fast? It uses a derivative function, and it checks that error, and what that does is determine how much of the brake pedal do I need now in order to slow this increase down so that I don't overshoot the temperature. You see, so it does it all by itself. It does. In this point, if you use a proportional integral derivative controller, you're doing primarily the same thing with a PWM. But the difference is that with a PWM, you are manipulating it. With the PID, it manipulates it itself. That's sort of like, see, this would be an open system, and this would be an open loop. This is a closed loop. Okay? It works with its own feedback mechanism, being your probe, to control precisely your temperature. Whereas this one you are making the adjustments based on experience and or an educated guess. Very simple. And you already know about our, see, this is our Rec C100. That I've left this put together because this is going to be a great tool just to play around with in the shop. But this does exactly the same thing. You see, there's that small probe I talked about. That, my friends, that is it. I am a fan of any method of controlling heat in your still. Now, that could be the use of a PID controller in an analog manner if you have the proper servos and you want to control propane. You could also do that with a pulse width modulator. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're operating servos because you have a certain amount of calibration that you have to work with. But just understand, however you determine or however you decide to control the heat in your system is going to benefit you in the long run. Now, before we go, I've got my trip planned out, and we will depart on the 27th of May, and I should arrive with Mike that Saturday. Oh, gosh, we're going to have a great time, and we're going to show you every bit of that. Now, two things I wanted to bring up before we get off the topic. One of them is packing your column. Regardless of what method you use, understand that if you change the environment of your process, you change the capability of your control mechanisms. Okay? If you overpack your column, you create a restriction. That restriction will have adverse effects on your temperature. I don't care if you're using propane, if you're using wood, or if you're using electricity. It makes no difference what your energy source is. You are going to be providing a restriction that's going to have an adverse effect on that. So make sure you don't overpack your column. And another point about packing. Packing has nothing to do with or has any effect on proof. There's a real misunderstanding there. Remember, we've done this before. There's a distinct line between alcohol by volume and proof. Okay? And in the middle of that is your column packing. Your column packing is nothing more than adding a surface area for your distillate to run across to become more pure should your process be solid. So just packing your still and using the same process, if it has failed you before, is not going to solve your problem. Okay? How you run your still determines what your proof is going to be. What you put in it, based alcohol by volume, has no effect on how much proof comes out. There's that dividing line. You cross over. You're like, okay, now I'm working on process. I could take a 3% mash or an 18% mash. Makes no difference at this point. The only effect that has is how much volume will I get on the other end. But what the proof of that volume is going to depend on how I run it. Okay? Man, I hope I got that. Oh, I hope that was clear and clear enough. Okay? Very, very good. Okay, now, we are at the end of this, and I like to say, as always, you understand now the differences and the comparisons between the two, and they are all excellent choices. So please, be safe, be happy, and of course, happy distilling.